I don't care who you are. Get out of that cabin before I call the police. That's the first thing she screamed, her voice a shrill tear in the fabric of the morning quiet. She saw me lighting a fire on the 40 acres of timberland I have legally owned since 1987, and her mind, poisoned by privilege, had already written the entire script. In her eyes, I was an illegal camper, a vagrant, a stain on the pristine, exclusive retreat area she and the rest of the HOA elite had claimed as their own. 10 minutes later, her script became a reality. 3 patrol cars, sirens wailing, screeched to a halt at the forest entrance. Karen, a woman whose name I would soon learn was Margaret Wellington, ran toward them, waving her arms like she was flagging down a getaway car, her finger pointing straight at me as she shrieked, "That's him! He's the one!" But then something happened that wasn't in her script. The lead officer stepped out of his cruiser. His eyes swept over the scene, then landed on me. He paused for a single charged second. Then he snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight, and rendered a salute with a military precision that was unmistakable. And in that moment, the entire world went dead silent, as if the forest itself held its breath, finally understanding that this woman, this self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, had just made a catastrophic, career-ending mistake. Because sometimes, the person you dismiss as a nobody turns out to be the one who wrote the very rules you're about to be broken by. The October morning mist was burning off Pine Ridge as I guided my old Chevy down the dirt road to my grandfather's cabin. After 35 years in the United States Army, this slice of inherited wilderness was my sanctuary, my decompression chamber. My wife, Sarah, had loved this place with a fierceness that still echoed in the rustle of the autumn leaves. Before the cancer took her 2 years ago, we'd spend weekends here, her sketching the fall colors in her notepad, while I pretended to read, my eyes never really leaving her. Now I was here alone, the quiet a heavy blanket, the peace a painful reminder of what I had lost. The weathered cedar cabin, with its solid stone chimney, represented something real, something earned, something money could never buy. I was splitting kindling, the rhythmic crack of the axe a familiar and comforting sound, when a pristine BMW X7, a vehicle that cost more than my first house, cruised down the access road. The driver, a blonde woman in oversized designer sunglasses, didn't even bother to get out of her luxury fortress. She just rolled down her window, her phone already in her hand, the red dot of its recording light a hostile eye in the morning sun. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice dripping with an entitled tone I had encountered 1,000 times before, usually from people who had never known a day of real hardship. "This is private property. You can't just set up camp wherever you want." Her phone was aimed at my face. "I'm going live," she announced to an unseen audience, "to document this trespassing situation. We've had persistent problems with homeless people trying to camp in our exclusive community." I set down the axe and approached her slowly, my hands open and visible. 35 years of training in de-escalation kicks in automatically, even when every fiber of your being is telling you the person you're dealing with is a lost cause. "Ma'am, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice calm. "My name is James Morrison, and this is my property. I have the deed right here if you'd like to see it." I reached for my wallet, slowly, deliberately. She was performing, and I knew a sudden move would be edited and spun into an act of aggression. "I don't care what fake documents you fabricated," she snapped, not even glancing at the paperwork in my hand. "I am Margaret Wellington, president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, and I know every single property owner in this community. You are not one of them." She held her phone higher, a predatory glint in her eye. "My followers know me as Iron Karen," she said, a nickname she delivered with a bizarre, unearned pride. and I am exposing another case of illegal camping in our pristine wilderness. This man is attempting to establish a homeless encampment on private land." The sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it almost made me laugh. I had commanded divisions of men and women who had fought and bled for the very freedoms this woman was now twisting into a weapon for her own pathetic reality show. "Mrs. Wellington," I said, trying one last time, "I understand your concern for your community, but I assure you, I am the legal owner of this land. My grandfather, Joseph Morrison, left this property to me in 1987. If you would just look at the deed—" "Nice try with the fake papers," she cut me off, zooming in on my face with her phone. "This entire area has been under HOA jurisdiction for over 20 years. Whatever scam you're running ends now. I'm calling the police." She was already dialing 911, her voice instantly shifting into a theatrical, high-pitched panic. "Yes, I need police at Pine Ridge Forest Road immediately. A vagrant is threatening me and trying to set up an illegal campsite. He has some kind of weapon, and he's being extremely aggressive and intimidating." I listened as she spun a web of lies so complete, so detailed, that for a moment even I wondered if I was the villain in her story. "Ma'am, I have not threatened you," I said, my voice clear and steady for the benefit of her recording. "I have been respectful and have repeatedly offered to show you my legal documentation." "Don't you dare gaslight me!" she shrieked, a term she had clearly just learned and was desperate to use. "I know what you're doing. You people think you can just move into decent neighborhoods and take over. Not on my watch!" The phrase "you people" hung in the air, a cloud of ugly, unspoken prejudice. She had made a series of assumptions about me based on my old truck, my worn work clothes, and my presence in her exclusive world. Her live stream was now a torrent of comments, a digital mob forming, some cheering on her brave stand, others questioning her narrative. "The police are on their way," she announced, her voice filled with a smug, triumphant finality. "And then we'll see who really belongs in this community." I walked back to the cabin steps and picked up the small framed photograph of Sarah I always brought with me. I looked at her smiling face and whispered a few words in Vietnamese, a language I learned in my first deployment, a lifetime ago. Sarah would have disarmed this woman with a quiet word and a compassionate smile. But Sarah wasn't here, and whatever was coming down that road was coming for me. What Iron Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend in her world of manicured lawns and manufactured outrage, was that the old field jacket I was wearing had one small, faded detail that only people in the service would recognize. The Silver Star insignia on my collar wasn't a decoration from a military surplus store. It was the real deal, earned through 3 decades of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. And when the right person spotted it, everything was about to change in a way that Margaret Wellington's social media strategy had never, ever accounted for. The 3 police cruisers pulled up with enough fanfare to make Karen's live stream dreams come true. She practically sprinted from her BMW toward the lead car, her phone held high like she was directing a movie scene. "Officers, thank God you're here!" she exclaimed, her voice a practiced quiver of manufactured fear. "This vagrant has been threatening me and refusing to leave private property. He claims to own this land, but that's impossible." She gestured dramatically toward me, playing the victim role for her growing online audience, a cascade of comments flying across her screen. The first officer out of the lead car was a Hispanic man in his early 40s. I immediately noticed 2 things about him. The first was a slight, almost imperceptible stiffness in his left leg, the kind a man develops when he's compensating for an old injury that never quite healed right. The second was his military bearing. It was unmistakable once you've seen enough of it. The way his shoulders were set, the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings. His nameplate read, "Rodriguez," and when his gaze swept over me, It lingered for a fraction of a second on my collar before his entire posture, his entire demeanor changed. "Ma'am, if you could please step back," Rodriguez said to Karen, his voice professional but firm. "Let us assess the situation." He approached me slowly, his eyes no longer on my face, but locked onto the faded silver star insignia that Karen had dismissed as a piece of cheap decoration. When he was close enough to confirm what he was seeing, something remarkable happened. This seasoned police officer, this man who dealt with the worst of society every single day, suddenly snapped to attention with the kind of rigid precision you only see on a military parade ground. "Major General Morrison?" Rodriguez's voice cracked slightly with disbelief as he rendered a perfect, crisp salute, his right hand sharp against his forehead, his left leg trembling almost imperceptibly with the effort of standing perfectly straight. The forest went dead quiet. The only sound was the wind, the distant sirens powering down, and the frantic, confused tapping of Karen's followers on her live stream. Her phone, which she had been holding up like a weapon, nearly slipped from her grasp. The confident, smug expression she had been wearing for her audience melted into a mask of pure, slack-jawed confusion, which then morphed into a dawning horror. Her viewers were exploding with questions. The comment feed became a waterfall of, "Wait, what?" and "Oh snap," and "Karen is so busted." She was losing control of her own narrative in real time. "Sir, it's an honor," Rodriguez said, his voice now thick with emotion. "I'm Sergeant Rodriguez, formerly of the 3rd Infantry Division." "Rodriguez," I said, returning his salute before extending my hand. "At ease, son. It's good to see you." The name had clicked the moment he'd identified his unit. The 3rd Infantry, Afghanistan, 2018. "You were the sergeant who got hit by that IED outside Kandahar." The memory came flooding back, a terrible day of smoke, fire, and blood, when his Humvee hit a roadside bomb and his left leg was mangled so badly we thought we'd lose him. "How's the leg holding up?" I asked. "Better every day, thanks to you, sir," Rodriguez replied, his composure finally breaking as a look of profound gratitude washed over his face. The other 2 officers were now out of their cars, watching this incredible exchange with a growing understanding. "You carried me 3 clicks back to the fob when the medevac couldn't land," Rodriguez said, turning his head slightly so Karen and her still-recording phone could hear every word. "The doc said another hour and I would have bled out for sure." He then turned his full attention to Karen, and the temperature in his voice dropped by about 40 degrees. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation proving your authority over this property?" Iron Karen's live stream was now a complete disaster for her. What had started as "brave citizen confronts dangerous vagrant" had morphed into "entitled HOA president harasses decorated war hero who saved the life of a local cop." Her comment section was a slaughterhouse. "Well, I'm the HOA president," she stammered, finally realizing that her usual tactics of loud, baseless assertions weren't going to work against verifiable facts. "This entire area falls under our jurisdiction. He can't just squat here illegally." "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some documentation of your claims," Rodriguez said, his tone now purely professional. "Because what I'm seeing here is a property owner, on his own land, being harassed by someone with a cell phone." He gestured toward me. "General Morrison, do you have your property documentation available?" I pulled out the deed and the survey maps, the same documents Karen had contemptuously refused to even look at. Rodriguez examined them carefully, his trained police officer's eye picking up the official seals and signatures that Karen's entitled ignorance had missed. Property purchased in 1987. Taxes current. Survey boundaries clearly marked. "Sir, this all appears to be completely legitimate." Karen's face was cycling through several shades of red and white as she watched her social media victory turn into a very public and now viral humiliation. The hashtag Iron Karen versus General was trending, and public opinion was not on her side. "This is ridiculous," she insisted. "I know every property owner in Pine Ridge Estates. He's lying about something." "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "I'm going to ask you one more time for any legal documentation supporting your claims. If you cannot provide a legal basis for your authority over this property, then you are the one who is trespassing." He turned back to me, his expression a mixture of profound respect and deep apology. "Sir, I am so sorry for any inconvenience this situation has caused. Is there anything else you need from us today?" Karen, realizing she had been utterly and completely defeated, wasn't finished. She still thought she could win. She had no idea that the man she was up against had co-authored the military's field manual on land rights disputes in contested territories, and had spent more time in legal briefings than she'd spent watching reality television. As she retreated to her BMW, her face a mask of cold fury, I knew this wasn't over. Margaret Wellington was about to learn that when you mess with someone who understands both the law and human nature, you'd better come prepared for a fight that goes way beyond social media theatrics. Within 24 hours of her humiliating live-stream defeat, Karen had mobilized what she undoubtedly thought was an impressive legal arsenal. Her attorney, a man named Harrison Blake from the prestigious firm of Blake, Sterling, and Associates, showed up at my cabin the next morning. He arrived in a Mercedes that cost more than my first 2 houses combined, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of supreme arrogance that comes from a lifetime of never facing real consequences. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Morrison," Blake announced, "my client, Mrs. Wellington, has retained me to resolve this property dispute. We have reason to believe you're occupying this land illegally, and we're prepared to pursue all available legal remedies." He handed me a thick envelope with a flourish, a cease and desist order requiring me to vacate the premises within 72 hours. I scanned the documents, noting the sloppy legal boilerplate and the complete lack of factual basis for their claims. "This is fascinating," I said. "Tell me, did you actually research the property boundaries before filing this, or were you just taking your client's word for it?" The order claimed I was squatting on HOA common land, a bold and easily disprovable lie. "Mrs. Wellington has been the HOA president for over a decade," Blake replied stiffly, while Karen sat in her BMW behind him, no doubt live-streaming this legal drama for her followers. "Your alleged ownership documents are outdated and superseded by the community development agreements established in 2003. "Interesting theory," I said, pulling out my own meticulously maintained documentation. "However, you might want to check with the county recorder's office. My deed predates your HOA by 15 years, and there's a charming little legal concept called grandfathered rights that they probably covered in your first year of law school." I handed him my survey maps and deed. "You'll also notice," I added, "that my property taxes have been current every year since 1987, which tends to establish a rather clear chain of ownership." Blake's confident facade wavered as he actually read my documents for the first time. I could practically see him calculating the billable hours his firm should have spent on due diligence before taking Karen's money. "We'll need to verify these," he stammered. "There may be zoning issues or environmental restrictions." "You're right to be thorough," I agreed pleasantly, "and while you're at it, you might want to look into Mrs. Wellington's legal authority to make representations about property she doesn't own. There are some very interesting laws about filing false documents and making fraudulent claims." Karen, apparently tired of watching from her car, stormed over, her phone held high. "He's stalling," she announced to her online audience. "He's trying to confuse the legal issues." She was trying to regain control of the narrative, but the desperation in her voice was palpable. "I have been protecting this community from undesirable elements for years," she continued, her classist undertones now fully explicit. "We have standards here, and we can't just let anyone move in and lower our property values." That evening, I received a threatening email, supposedly from Blake's law firm, from a generic Gmail account. The legal terminology was so laughably incorrect, it was clear Karen had written it herself after a frantic Google search. I forwarded it to my son, Michael, a partner at a real law firm in Washington, D.C. His reply was swift. "Dad, this is either a fake lawyer or the worst real lawyer in Virginia. Also, why didn't you tell me you were having property issues? I've been hoping for an excuse to come visit." Karen had picked a legal fight with a man whose son was an actual high-powered attorney. It was another in a long line of strategic blunders. The next morning, a county inspector arrived, claiming an anonymous complaint about my building permits. It was clear Karen was now using her HOA connections to create a multi-front bureaucratic war. But she had no idea that her attacks on a retired major general had just activated a network that operates on a level of loyalty and efficiency she couldn't possibly comprehend. When the words Major General Morrison being harassed by HOA president hit the Veterans Brotherhood Facebook group, an entire legion woke up. Karen Wellington was about to discover that when you target one soldier, you pick a fight with the entire damn army. And some wars can't be won with lawyers and live streams, especially when you're facing an opponent who knows how to conduct actual intelligence operations. Within 24 hours of her humiliating live stream defeat, Karen had mobilized what she undoubtedly thought was an impressive legal arsenal. Her attorney, a man named Harrison Blake from the prestigious firm of Blake, Sterling, and Associates, showed up at my cabin the next morning. He arrived in a Mercedes that cost more than my first 2 houses combined, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of supreme arrogance that comes from a lifetime of never facing real consequences. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Morrison," Blake announced, "my client, Mrs. Wellington, has retained me to resolve this property dispute. We have reason to believe you're occupying this land illegally, and we're prepared to pursue all available legal remedies." He handed me a thick envelope with a flourish, a cease and desist order requiring me to vacate the premises within 72 hours. I scanned the documents, noting the sloppy legal boilerplate and the complete lack of factual basis for their claims. "This is fascinating," I said. "Tell me, did you actually research the property boundaries before filing this, or were you just taking your client's word for it?" The order claimed I was squatting on HOA common land, a bold and easily disprovable lie. "Mrs. Wellington has been the HOA president for over a decade," Blake replied stiffly, while Karen sat in her BMW behind him, no doubt live streaming this legal drama for her followers. "Your alleged ownership documents are outdated and superseded by the community development agreements established in 2003. "Interesting theory," I said, pulling out my own meticulously maintained documentation. "However, you might want to check with the county recorder's office. My deed predates your HOA by 15 years, and there's a charming little legal concept called grandfathered rights that they probably covered in your first year of law school." I handed him my survey maps and deed. "You'll also notice," I added, "that my property taxes have been current every year since 1987, which tends to establish a rather clear chain of ownership." Blake's confident facade wavered as he actually read my documents for the first time. I could practically see him calculating the billable hours his firm should have spent on due diligence before taking Karen's money. "We'll need to verify these," he stammered. "There may be zoning issues or environmental restrictions." "You're right to be thorough," I agreed pleasantly. "And while you're at it, you might want to look into Mrs. Wellington's legal authority to make representations about property she doesn't own. There are some very interesting laws about filing false documents and making fraudulent claims. Karen, apparently tired of watching from her car, stormed over, her phone held high. "He's stalling," she announced to her online audience. "He's trying to confuse the legal issues." She was trying to regain control of the narrative, but the desperation in her voice was palpable. "I have been protecting this community from undesirable elements for years," she continued, her classist undertones now fully explicit. "We have standards here, and we can't just let anyone move in and lower our property values." That evening, I received a threatening email, supposedly from Blake's law firm, from a generic Gmail account. The legal terminology was so laughably incorrect, it was clear Karen had written it herself after a frantic Google search. I forwarded it to my son, Michael, a partner at a real law firm in Washington, D.C. His reply was swift. "Dad, this is either a fake lawyer or the worst real lawyer in Virginia. Also, why didn't you tell me you were having property issues? I've been hoping for an excuse to come visit." Karen had picked a legal fight with a man whose son was an actual high-powered attorney. It was another in a long line of strategic blunders. The next morning, a county inspector arrived, claiming an anonymous complaint about my building permits. It was clear Karen was now using her HOA connections to create a multi-front bureaucratic war. But she had no idea that her attacks on a retired major general had just activated a network that operates on a level of loyalty and efficiency she couldn't possibly comprehend. When the words, "Major General Morrison being harassed by HOA president," hit the Veterans Brotherhood Facebook group, an entire legion woke up. Karen Wellington was about to discover that when you target one soldier, you pick a fight with the entire damn army. And some wars can't be won with lawyers and live streams, especially when you're facing an opponent who knows how to conduct actual intelligence operations. When Karen realized she couldn't win with lawyers or public opinion, she decided to stop playing by any rules at all. She was going to attack the one thing she thought would destroy me completely, my military service record. She was going to turn the very thing that had earned me respect into a weapon against me. But Margaret Wellington was about to learn that when you try to destroy someone's honor, you better make damn sure you understand exactly who you're dealing with and what kind of allies they've made over 3 decades of service. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously, coordinated with the kind of precision that Karen probably thought made her a strategic genius. First, a story appeared in the Pine Ridge Community Newsletter, a glossy, professionally printed piece of propaganda she sent to every home. The article, titled "Balancing Compassion and Community Safety," suggested that our neighborhood, while supportive of veterans, had a responsibility to be aware of the potential for combat-related psychological issues that could make some individuals a potential danger to the community. It didn't name me directly, but the references to unstable veterans and PTSD episodes were clearly aimed at undermining the respect that Rodriguez's salute had generated. It was a vile, cowardly attack, character assassination disguised as civic concern. The same day, she hired Thompson Investigative Services, a private detective firm that specialized in what their website euphemistically called background verification for community safety. Their job was to dig through my entire military record, looking for anything: a reprimand, a bar fight from 30 years ago, a difficult mission report that could be twisted into evidence that I was unfit to live among decent people. Karen was betting that 35 years of military service, much of it in combat zones, would have to include something she could take out of context and use to paint me as a dangerous, unstable man. What she didn't know was that Marcus Webb, the lead investigator and owner of the firm she'd hired, was a former military intelligence officer who'd worked with my unit during 2 separate deployments in Afghanistan. Marcus had been the one whose intel had helped us identify and dismantle IED networks, and his work had saved more American lives than Karen could count. When he received her contract and realized who his target was supposed to be, Marcus made a decision that demonstrated the difference between loyalty that's bought and loyalty that's earned. "General Morrison," Marcus said when he called me that evening, his voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that comes from watching someone attack a person you respect. "I thought you should know that Mrs. Wellington has hired my firm to investigate your military service record. She's looking for anything that might suggest you're psychologically unstable or have a history of violence. She specifically asked me to focus on any incidents involving civilian casualties or disciplinary actions." I wasn't surprised by Karen's tactics, but I was impressed by her complete and utter failure to understand how the military intelligence network functions. "Marcus, I appreciate the heads up. What did you tell her?" "I told her that thorough investigations take time and that she should expect my preliminary report in 2 weeks," Marcus replied. "What I didn't tell her is that my report is going to be very thorough indeed, including documentation of her request for me to fabricate evidence if I couldn't find any real problems." The grim satisfaction in his voice suggested that Karen had just handed him everything he needed to destroy her credibility permanently. But Karen's nuclear option was still building momentum. She'd managed to get a local television reporter, a woman named Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News, interested in a story about veteran mental health and community safety. She was hoping to generate a wave of negative coverage that would force me to leave quietly. The interview was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I could see Karen's plan perfectly. She would present herself as a concerned community leader, trying to balance compassion for veterans with safety for families, while subtly painting me as a ticking time bomb. Then, at 3 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, everything changed in a way that Karen hadn't planned and couldn't control. I woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of Tank shouting my name from outside the cabin. The old, frayed electrical system that I'd been meaning to upgrade had finally given up. Flames were already consuming the kitchen and spreading with terrifying speed toward the living room, where Sarah's photographs and our 30 years of memories were stored. The volunteer fire department arrived within 15 minutes, but by then, it was too late to save the cabin. Tank and several other veterans had managed to drag me out safely, but everything inside was lost. Standing in my boxer shorts and a borrowed jacket, watching 3 decades of my life turn to ash, I felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with property damage. Sarah's sketches, our wedding photos, the letters she'd written to me during every deployment, all of it was gone. But as the fire crew worked to contain the blaze, they discovered something incredible. The solid stone foundation of the cabin, which my grandfather had built to withstand anything, had protected a small, hidden underground storage area, a root cellar he had converted into a fireproof safe room. Inside that hidden space was a heavy metal strongbox that had survived not just the fire, but decades of weather and time. When we finally pried the box open the next morning, amidst the smoking ruins of my home, what we found changed the entire war. Inside was my grandfather's real will, not the simplified version that had been filed with the county. Alongside it were the original hand-drawn survey maps and land purchase documents for this entire area, dating back to 1925. But the most important documents, the ones that were about to bring Karen Wellington's entire world crashing down, proved that the HOA's property claims, the very foundation of their existence, were based on forged documents that had been illegally filed in 1994. Karen had hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my past, not knowing the investigator was already on my side. She had tried to destroy my reputation with lies about my mental state, not realizing that her own financial crimes were already being documented. And now, thanks to a fire that she hadn't caused, but that had revealed evidence she had spent decades trying to hide, Margaret Wellington was about to discover that some battles can't be won when the truth finally comes to light. What my grandfather had hidden in that fireproof strongbox wasn't just a will. It was the complete, documented history of a fraud that had been running for 30 years. The documents proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Margaret Wellington hadn't just been lying about my 40 acres of property rights. She had been running a sophisticated scam that had stolen land from multiple families and funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into her own personal accounts. More importantly, these papers were about to give me the platform to end this war in the most public and devastating way imaginable. The real estate documents in the Strongbox told a story that Karen had spent 3 decades trying to bury. In 1925, my great-grandfather had purchased not just the 40 acres where my cabin stood, but an additional 260 acres that encompassed most of what was now Pine Ridge Estates. The entire HOA development had been built on land that legally, according to these original, never-before-seen documents, still belonged to my family. The property transfer documents from 1994, the ones that formed the entire legal basis for the HOA's existence, were forgeries. Michael spent all of Thursday at the county recorder's office, cross-referencing the original deeds we'd found with the official records. "Dad, this isn't just about your property," he said when he returned, spreading copies across the makeshift table Tank had set up in the clearing. "Karen has been systematically filing false ownership claims and collecting HOA fees on land that was never legally part of the development." The financial records Tank's team had acquired painted an even uglier picture. For over 20 years, Karen had been collecting monthly HOA fees from residents who believed they were paying for community maintenance. Instead, a significant portion of that money had been diverted into accounts controlled by shell companies, all of which were owned by Margaret Wellington's various business entities. The landscaping contracts, the security services, the property management fees, all inflated, all redirected to benefit her personally. But the most damning evidence of all was a series of old cassette tapes my grandfather had recorded in 1994, when he'd first discovered what a young, ambitious Karen was planning. Grandpa Joe, always suspicious of anyone trying to change property boundaries, had documented every conversation he'd had with county officials, lawyers, and Karen herself. On the tapes, her voice, younger but just as arrogant, made it clear that she knew from the very beginning that she was stealing land, and that she planned to wait until my grandfather passed away to fully implement her scheme. "General, you need to see this," Maria Santos said, looking up from her laptop with an expression of barely contained outrage. Mrs. Wellington's social media accounts from 2019 show her bragging about acquiring additional community assets through strategic negotiation. She's been treating this crime like a business accomplishment. By Friday afternoon, I had made a decision that would have made my grandfather proud. Instead of handling this quietly through lawyers and backroom negotiations, I was going to give Margaret Wellington the public accountability she had been so eager to create with her live streams. I called Jennifer Walsh at Channel 7 News and told her that I had irrefutable proof of HOA fraud that would make her veteran mental health story look like small-town gossip. The press conference was scheduled for Saturday morning, in the clearing where my cabin had burned to the ground. The visual was perfect. The ashes of my home, surrounded by the quiet strength of the veteran community that had rallied to my side. Word spread through social media like wildfire. By 9 a.m., we had news crews from 3 different stations, a reporter from the regional newspaper, and a crowd of nearly 200 people who had come to witness what Tank was now calling the reckoning. Karen arrived in her BMW right on schedule, apparently thinking she was going to continue her campaign of character assassination in front of the cameras. She had her phone out and was already live-streaming her approach to what she thought would be my final humiliation. "I'm here to provide context for whatever lies this unstable veteran is planning to tell," she announced to her remaining followers. "The community needs to hear the truth about what happened here. What happened next was the kind of public devastation that social media was designed to capture and preserve forever. With the news cameras rolling and Karen's own live stream broadcasting to her followers, I methodically presented every single piece of evidence we had uncovered. The forged property transfers, the diverted HOA funds, the business records showing how she had been stealing from her own neighbors for decades. And then I played the tapes. My grandfather's strong, steady voice from 1994, confronting a young Karen Wellington about her fraudulent plans. "Mrs. Wellington," I said, looking directly at her as she stood frozen beside her car, her face a mask of disbelief. "You called me a vagrant and demanded that I prove my right to exist in this community. Well, here is my proof." I held up my grandfather's original deed and survey maps. This entire development was built on land that my family has owned since 1925. Every HOA fee you've collected, every assessment you've levied, every family you've intimidated, it was all based on a lie. Karen's livestream captured her complete and total breakdown in real time. The confident, powerful Iron Karen persona crumbled, revealing a desperate, cornered criminal. "You can't prove any of this," she stammered, but her voice had no conviction. She could see the documents, hear the recordings that proved everything. "Mrs. Wellington, we can prove all of it," Michael said, stepping forward with a folder thick with legal papers. "In fact, we've already filed formal complaints with the District Attorney's Office, the State Real Estate Commission, and the IRS. Your little empire is over." The final blow came when Mrs. Chen, the elderly HOA board member who had been intimidated by Karen for years, stepped in front of the cameras. "She told my family we didn't belong in this community," Mrs. Chen said quietly, her voice trembling but clear. "She said people like us brought down property values and that we should sell our house before she found legal ways to force us out." I have the recording of that conversation on my phone. As her world collapsed around her, Karen made one last desperate act. She pulled out her cell phone and made a call, not to her lawyer, but to someone she had mentioned briefly in her previous rants about family. "David," she said into the phone, her voice breaking with a sob. "I need you to come home. I need my son to help me." Margaret Wellington had spent 30 years building an empire based on lies, intimidation, and stolen money. In the span of a single press conference, that empire had become a pile of legal documents that would send her to prison. But her final phone call suggested that the real reckoning was still to come, and it would involve the one person whose opinion she seemed to care about most. Karen's final phone call wasn't to a lawyer or a political contact who might help her escape the consequences of 30 years of fraud. In her moment of total desperation, she called the one person whose respect she'd been trying to earn her entire adult life. She called her son, Special Agent David Wellington of the FBI. What she was about to discover, in the most public and brutal way possible, was that the child she had raised to believe in justice and integrity had grown into a man who would not compromise those values, even for the woman who had given him life. David arrived at Pine Ridge on Sunday morning, driving a government-issued sedan that looked deliberately understated compared to his mother's luxury BMW. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of controlled, professional bearing that comes from years of federal law enforcement training. When he got out of his car and surveyed the scene, the assembled news crews, the crowd of veteran supporters, and the evidence tables that Michael had organized, his expression was one of grim, professional resignation. He already knew how this story was going to end. "Mom," he said quietly, approaching Karen, who was still sitting in her car with the windows up, hoping the whole situation would disappear if she just ignored it long enough. "We need to talk." His voice carried the weight of someone who had spent years investigating complex financial crimes and could recognize a catastrophic legal situation when he saw one. And you need to turn off that live stream right now. Karen's face, when she saw her son had arrived, was a tragic mixture of relief and terror. She had been counting on David to somehow use his federal connections to make all of her problems go away. But the look on his face told her that wasn't going to happen. "David, thank God you're here," she said, getting out of her car with the kind of forced enthusiasm that desperate people use to convince themselves that everything is fine. "These people are trying to destroy everything I've built. They're using fake documents and fabricated evidence." "Mom, stop talking," David said firmly. "Just stop." He pulled out his badge and walked over to where I was standing with Michael and Tank. "Sir, I'm Special Agent Wellington, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I need to apologize for my mother's behavior, and I need you to know that anything she has done here has nothing to do with federal law enforcement." The professional distance in his voice made it clear that he was speaking as an FBI agent, not as Karen's son. What happened next was perhaps the most devastating revelation of the entire week. David explained that the FBI had been investigating the Pine Ridge Estates HOA for over 6 months as part of a broader inquiry into municipal corruption and property fraud in Virginia. When reports started coming in about unusual property transfers and financial irregularities, your HOA was flagged for investigation, he told the assembled crowd. What I did not know until yesterday was that my own mother was the primary suspect. Karen's reaction to learning that her son had been investigating her crimes for months was a complete and total emotional collapse. The woman who had spent the week trying to destroy my reputation and force me from my property suddenly became a broken, fragile person who could barely stand upright. "David, you don't understand," she sobbed. "I was trying to build something important. I was trying to create value for the community." "Mom, you stole nearly $400,000 from your neighbors over 20 years, David replied, his voice heavy with a disappointment that went far beyond his professional duty. "You forged legal documents, filed false property claims, and intimidated elderly residents into selling their homes for below market value. That's not community building. That's organized crime." The federal charges that David outlined were extensive enough to put Karen in prison for the rest of her life. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, money laundering, and violation of civil rights under color of local authority. But what broke my heart, watching this family's destruction play out in front of the news cameras, was seeing a son who had dedicated his life to upholding the law having to arrest his own mother. But the story wasn't over yet. In a moment that surprised everyone, including David, I stepped forward and addressed the cameras directly. "I want to make something clear," I said, looking at the reporters and the crowd of supporters who had gathered to witness Karen's downfall. "Mrs. Wellington committed serious crimes, and she needs to face the consequences. But this community also needs healing, not just punishment." What I announced next was something I had been thinking about since Thursday night, when the fire had destroyed my cabin but revealed the truth about this land. I am donating 200 acres of this property, land that has been proven to be legally owned by my family, to the county for the creation of a public park and campground. It will be free for all veterans and their families, and it will include facilities for community events that bring people together instead of driving them apart. The idea had been Sarah's originally, something she had mentioned years ago about wanting to share the beauty of these woods with people who needed peace, and the offer of redemption that followed was perhaps the most important part of the whole story. Instead of simply watching Karen go to prison for the rest of her life, David proposed, and I supported, a sentence that focused on community service and restitution. She would work at a nonprofit counseling center, helping people deal with the kind of control issues and fear of abandonment that had driven her own criminal behavior. "My mother needs to understand how her actions affected real people," David said, and maybe helping others will help her find a way to live with what she's done. Karen's acceptance of responsibility, which came through tears, and a genuine remorse that seemed to surprise everyone, including herself, was the first honest thing she had said since this whole confrontation began. 6 months later, Pine Ridge Estates had been completely reorganized, with transparent financial management and community input on all major decisions. The new Veterans Campground, built on the land I had donated, was hosting its first family weekend, with Karen quietly volunteering to help coordinate activities as part of her court-ordered community service. David visited her regularly, working to rebuild a relationship with his mother based on honesty instead of manipulation. I was sitting by the fire pit where my new, smaller cabin was taking shape, watching Michael teach his daughter how to skip stones on the creek that ran through our family's land. Tank was grilling hamburgers for a dozen veterans and their families who had become weekend regulars, and Mrs. Chen was showing Sarah's old sketches to anyone who wanted to hear stories about the woman who had loved this place before any of us understood its true value. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's helping them find their way home to the person they were meant to be all along.